Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and today I'm really excited to be continuing my individual Pokemon analysis series for the VGC 2017 format. If you don't know what this series is, I've already done one on Pelipper a few weeks ago, and you can check that out in the description below. But these guides are basically meant to be a quick crash course for all these individual Pokemon, and it's supposed to give you an overall summary of these Pokemon in the VGC 2017 format. So it includes information such as why these Pokemon are used, it gives a couple of sample sets, and it talks about good items, good partners, and good ways to counter it. So the goal is that in 20 minutes or under, you'll have a very strong understanding of the Pokemon, and you also have a couple of sets to try the individual Pokemon out with. So hope you guys enjoyed this series. If it is something you do enjoy, please show support by leaving a like in the video and sharing it with anyone who may be interested. I really want to get a lot more of these out now that I'm back home for winter break and I have a lot more time to work on it. So I really want to be pushing this out on maybe even a daily basis. So let me know how often you want to see these, and I'll definitely take the feedback into consideration. And yeah, if you do enjoy this series, please show support by leaving a like. I would really appreciate it. But without further ado, we are going to jump into this guide. This one's going to be on Tapu Koko, one of the new Pokemon and one of the most commonly seen Pokemon in the format right now. So as always, I kind of break things down by looking at base stats first, and Tapu Koko's base stats, I remember when it was first announced as a Pokemon in Sun and Moon, everyone was freaking out because it looked super strong, especially with Alolan and Raichu as a combination. But then once we saw its stats, we were like, okay, you know, this is actually pretty manageable. It's got a really good base speed, but 95 special attack is actually, you know, it's not the worst, but it's also not incredible. And that's something that a lot of people were actually kind of relieved to see, because if you'd imagine if that special attack was something like 120, 130, then man, Tapu Koko would just be so strong, especially because it does set up electric terrain already with its ability. So it's got really well-rounded stats. I mean, 70, 85, 75 defenses, like that's pretty solid. It's not incredible, but it also means that you can definitely take attacks. 115 attack is actually super high, but you know, most Tapu Kokos we see in the metagame currently are more specially oriented. And of course, 130 speed is a huge selling point because that's faster than almost the entire metagame. So overall, just really well-rounded stats, and you know, you can take advantage of all of them. And as a result, you know, speed is definitely the one that sticks out the most. Tapu Koko is one of the fastest Pokemon in the metagame currently. So why do people use Tapu Koko? You know, it's one of the most commonly seen Pokemon in VGC 17 right now, and we saw that its base special attack isn't that great, and most people are using a special variant. Well, to answer that question, first of all, as I mentioned, Tapu Koko is one of the fastest Pokemon in the format. It allows you to really outspeed almost everything that's commonly seen, and speed is always a big deal in VGC. If you can maintain your speed and manage it well, then you'll have the upper hand. And so, by being one of the fastest Pokemon in the format, you often have an advantage, especially in the beginning of the game before your opponent can get any means of speed control going. Fairy and Electric is a very good offensive typing. You'd imagine that there are a lot of Pokemon that can resist electric type attacks, for example, say Garchomp or Crocodile, and those are ground type Pokemon that threaten Tapu Koko. But Fairy actually covers, you know, the dark types and the dragon types and whatnot, and so you have some really good synergy between Electric and Fairy. It hits a lot of the format for very good damage. Tapu Koko also directly threatens one of the metagame's largest threats, and Celesteela is a Pokemon that you guys, if you've been playing VGC 17 at all, if you've been watching the streams at all, you'll know that it's a major threat, and a lot of teams are ill-prepared to deal with it. You know, Celesteela is one of those Pokemon that really likes to go for the end game, and what that means is it really stalls out the game by knocking out its biggest threats, and in the end of the game, it can just kind of win games off leech seeding, substituting, protecting, and leftovers. And so it's always nice to have Tapu Koko because with electric terrain, and if you have a special attack boosting item, for example, then you can actually just one-hit KO it, and that's a big deal because there are not that many Pokemon in the format that can say that. So really strong option, and it's nice to be able to check one of the strongest Pokemon in the format right now. As mentioned, Tapu Koko's ability does allow you to automatically set up electric terrain, and terrain, of course, is a big deal, especially in VGC 17, with all 4 Tapus around. And, of course, electric terrain has multiple effects. One, you do boost the electric type attacking damage output, so that's really good for, obviously, Tapu Koko, but also potential partners, such as Alolan and Raichu. It also means that your opponent can't spam, like, sleep-induced, for example, Sleep Powder, and that was really, it's a nice way to check, for example, teams that have Lilligant Torkoal, you know, as a combination that I was using a little bit earlier on. Not exactly the most common duel, but it is another nice side effect. I would say people definitely use electric terrain most for the electric type boosting, but you know, the side effects are also pretty nice. Tapu Koko can also be run in various ways, and it's like a relatively predictable Pokemon, but the thing is that your item choice is pretty flexible. The most two common items are Life Orb and Focus Sash, and I'll cover items a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But in general, yeah, you can run Tapu Koko special, physical. You can even run it with like a support style with Taunt or Sky Drop, and so definitely have a lot of options. And as a result, despite the fact that it is kind of frail, it fits onto both offensive and defensive teams, and that's really cool because we've seen a lot of very hyper offensive teams. For example, the team I've been using on Road to Ranked with Pelipper and Golduck, that now does have a Tapu Koko, and Tapu Koko fits quite nicely onto that. But we also have seen very defensive-oriented teams. If you look at Sekiyam's team, he was the winner of the London International. His team was very bulky, had Pokemon like Gastrodon, Arcanine, Celesteela, and Tapu Koko was one of the more offensive members on that team, and it fit perfectly onto it as well. So, some of those Pokemon that can really fit onto a lot of different teams, and as a result, it's pretty flexible. So let's talk a little bit about the moves that Tapu Koko gets. The way I normally do this is I kind of split it up into, the most commonly seen attacks and then other viable attacks. So when it comes to most commonly seen, I would say the top 4 or top 5 are definitely the kind of standard, like Thunderbolt, Dazzling Gleam, Discharge, and Protect. If you had to pick one standard moveset for Tapu Koko, that would probably be it. Volt Switch, definitely viable as well. Thunder is very viable, especially if you're obviously running Pelipper or Politoed on your team, because it sets up the rain for 100% accurate thunders. Otherwise, you don't normally see thunder too much, but if you are going up against opposing rain teams, you might want to consider that. Hidden Power, it's not one that's seen, I would say, as common as the first 4 or first 5, but it's still definitely viable. I actually used Hidden Power Ice on my Tapu Koko set to kind of nuke Garchomps and Salamensis, since Dazzling Gleam actually doesn't pick up that knockout. You can also try different Hidden Powers, though. For example, Hidden Power Fire, or maybe even Hidden Power Poison. But other commonly seen attacks, or not as commonly seen, but other attacks that I've seen people use include Nature's Madness and Taunt. I actually had Taunt on my Tapu Koko as well, that I brought to San Jose, and it's a really nice way to kind of shut down Trick Room users, especially Porygon 2. Nature's Madness, strong option if you want to just get a quick 50% damage off, but you do have to deal with its accuracy, and of course, Thunderbolt normally just does a lot of damage anyway. Skydrop's a really cool option that has definitely not been used as much as, or it's basically been underexplored, because Tapu Koko being as fast as it is, you can easily Skydrop and either set up with a partner or kind of chain combos off with it. So it's a really cool option. And you've got the 3 physical type attacks that it really likes in Wild Charge, Brave Bird, and U-Turn. And finally, Grass Knot's an option I expect to see a little bit more of, especially now that Gastrodon is on the uprise in the format. But in general, this covers most of the moves you'll see on Tapu Koko. Of course, there are definitely moves that I have not mentioned that are viable, such as Swagger, Light Screen, Reflect, I believe it gets all of those. But in general, these are like the attacks that you'll see probably most often on opposing Tapu Koko. It's also probably the moves that you'll want to consider using the most, but like I mentioned, it's not every single move. These are just the ones I've deemed the most viable and the most common. So what about items on Tapu Koko? Life Orb and Focus Sash are by far the most common items right now. Like, if you go up against a Tapu Koko, there's a very, very good chance it has one of those 2 items. And there's, pretty good reason for that. Life Orb's amazing because Tapu Koko's base special attack actually isn't incredible. So, if you have a Life Orb and you have Electric Terrain, then suddenly you're doing a lot more damage. Focus Sash, on the other hand, though, does allow you to survive moves that would normally one-hit KO it. So, for example, one of the combinations that I've been using and a lot of other top players have been trying out is the Pelipper Golduck combination, and Golduck's Z move just one-hit KOs Tapu Koko instantly. But if you do have the Focus Sash, then you can actually survive and get potentially a Discharge off, or maybe even a double knockout. And so, Sash allows you to really survive those attacks that are meant to nuke Tapu Koko, and it allows you to survive and get an attack off, and sometimes that's a big deal. And Sekiyam actually did win the London Continental with Focus Sash on his Tapu Koko. Other items I've seen, though, and just a couple of others, include Choice Specs. Choice Specs is really, really strong, but of course you do have to lock yourself into the attack, and that's a big issue, especially because there are a lot of Pokemon that can switch into electric type attacks, but still really strong and can often pick up surprise one-hit KOs. Electrium Z is obviously the Electric Z move, and that's really, really strong when you've got Electric Terrain up as well. Of course, you could use other Z moves, such as the Fairy Z move and the Tapu Z move, but in general, I think Electric is probably the strongest option for it. And Electric Seed's a pretty cool option as well, because it allows you to get an instant defense boost that could come in handy against Pokemon that use physical type attacks like Garchomp and other, physical Pokemon. But in general, I would say Life Orb and Sash definitely the most 2 common items right now. And, there are obviously other viable items on it as well, but with an offensive Pokemon such as Tapu Koko, Life Orb and Sash make the most sense. So now I want to go into a couple of sample sets for this Pokemon. These are all in the description below, so if you want to just throw one of these Tapu Kokos onto your team on Pokemon Showdown and try it out, you can definitely go for it. Feel free to try them out. Now, the first one, this is a pretty basic Focus Sash variant. You know, just got max special attack and speed investment. You've got Thunderbolt, Discharge, Dazzling Gleam, and Protect. This was actually, once again, the exact set that Sekium used to win the London Continental, and it's a relatively standard set. I mean, like, a lot of players have been using this kind of set, but it's really strong and it works for a reason. A Discharge, you know, you could easily swap out if you don't have something that combos nicely with it, but of course if you're running something like Garchomp or Gastrodon, then it's very easy to combo off Discharge, and it's a really strong option, especially against a rain team. So this is one of the most common Tapu Kokos running around right now, but for good reason. This other one is a Life Orb variant, and Life Orb is, of course, like I mentioned, a really strong option as well. You could run Timid or Modest with Tapu Koko, but with Life Orb, I really like Modest. There's not too much in the speed tier between Modest and Timid that you're missing out on. So, of course, if you run max speed, then you can speed tie with opposing Tapu Kokos that are max speed, and you can also you know, check those other base 130 Pokemon that are in the format. But Modest in general, like, if your team can deal with the base 130s, then Modest makes a lot more sense, because now you do, you know, a lot more damage, and you're not missing out on too much speed. And so this is kind of the same moveset, but now you've got Modest and Life Orb, and so this one hits a little bit harder, but of course you do have to worry about those attacks that can one-shot you, such as Golduck Z move or Tapu Lele Z move, or just Earthquakes. But this is a really strong offensive set, and in general it hits a little bit harder than the previous set, but you do have to be a little bit more careful with it. This next one's actually the set that I brought to the San Jose Regional Championships, and I finished 6th there out of around like 244 players, and it's a set that I really liked, and it fit particularly well on my team. So I actually did not have Dazzling Gleam, I had Hidden Power Ice instead, and that's because against for example, non-Assault Vest Garchomps or Focus Sash Garchomps, HP Ice can actually just pick up the one-hit KO. That's a big deal, because Garchomp definitely was a scary Pokemon, and you know, we do see a lot of Ground DMZ Garchomps, and so HP Ice is a really nice check to that. And people are like, you know, Dazzling Gleam would be so strong, but for me, I really didn't need the fairy coverage as much, and I wanted something that can check Garchomp and Salamence. Having a way to one-shot Salamence is really nice as well, especially because not that many Salamences currently are Choice Scarf. Of course, Thunderbolt is a staple, Protect is a staple, and Taunt was actually my last move, and I had Taunt because Porygon 2 and Trick Room teams in general gave my team some trouble, so having an unexpected Taunt was really nice because it caught opponents off guard, and if you could deny Taunt, like if you could deny Trick Room on the first turn when they go for it, then they waste the whole turn trying to go for it, and then you can really play around there, especially if your team is well equipped for it. So it's a tech move, but on my team it worked really well, and it was definitely necessary, and something I would recommend if you want to catch your opponent off guard. For example, I didn't really need Discharge on that team anyway, and Dazzling Gleam was something, like I mentioned, that was not an option that I really thought was that strong for my team composition in particular. And finally, you know, I've covered a lot of special sets, but there's also a physical variant, and I haven't really seen too many physical Tapu Kokos running around, but it's something that definitely can work. All the top performing Tapu Kokos currently have been special, but I think people just haven't really bothered trying out physical Tapu Koko, or maybe some have tried it out and not deemed it that strong, but we haven't really seen players bring it to events, really. So it's something that I think can definitely still have a lot of potential. This one actually has Electrium Z, because Wild Charge is a really, really strong move. Combine that with the Electric Z move, and you can just pick up one-hit KOs left and right. Brave Bird and Skydrop are the other two attacks. I mean, you could use attacks such as U-Turn as well, but Skydrop is something that I think is super underutilized on Tapu Koko right now, and you can really take advantage of its fast speed by using it. And Brave Bird just for some strong offensive damage left and right. Mainly, Wild Charge will be your attack, but Brave Bird, of course, can cover grass types such as Tapu Bulu, which is a Pokemon that, you know, normally gives Tapu Koko a fair amount of trouble, and so it's definitely a strong option as well. So this set, obviously not as common, but I did want to include it because all the other sets have been special and been relatively common. So if you want to try out physical Tapu Koko, definitely go for it. You know, it does hit really hard, and its base attack is higher than its base special attack, so definitely something that has potential in this format. So regarding EV spreads, all the spreads that I've included in this video have been the basic 4, 252, 252 spread, and there's a reason for that. Tapu Koko is one of those Pokemon where, you know, that spread is honestly probably one of the most ideal spreads because it is meant to be a more offensive Pokemon. As a result, you want to just maximize your damage output and your speed. you know, it has pretty okay defensive stats, so you can normally take 2 neutral hits anyway if it's not like boosted by a boosting item. And so as a result, especially if you're using an item such as Focus Sash, there's really no need to have any extra bulk. You should choose your nature based off your Tapu Koko's role. Like I talked a little bit about timid versus modest, or if you're going jolly versus adamant for the physical variant, but in general, like if you feel like, okay, I want to speed tie with Tapu Koko's opposing Tapu Kokos or those other base 130s, and of course timid makes sense, but if those aren't as much of an issue, then modest for higher damage output. And of course, there's definitely potential, I would say, for bulkier variants, especially one with Assault Vest. I think that would be pretty cool, but it's not something I've really tried out as well, and it's not something we've really seen, so that's something that probably will be explored a little bit more on as the season goes on. But, you know, I'm not saying you should or have to use 4/252, 252. You can definitely try out bulkier variants with HP or defense and special defensive investment. It's just that, in my opinion, Tapu Koko is one of those Pokemon that it makes a lot of sense to just go with the simple spread, because it just wants to hit as strong as possible, and you know, wants to take advantage of the fact that it's really fast. So that's kind of my opinion on EV spreads for Tapu Koko. So how do you beat it? You know, it's one of the most common Pokemon in the format. Chances are, if you play this format at all, you will go up against it. Well, the good thing about Tapu Koko is that there are a lot of ways to check it, and so I'm going to go through a couple of examples. Alolan Marowak is definitely the one that sticks out the most, because it completely shuts down the electric type attacks from Tapu Koko, and Dazzling Gleam doesn't do very much. You know, all the options that Tapu Koko has, Alolan Marowak can just take it easily, and KO in return with the Boomerang. So, if you're looking for like a direct counter to Tapu Koko, then you should look at Alolan Marowak, because having used Tapu Koko myself, I know that every time I look at Alolan Marowak in Team Preview, I have to think twice about just bringing it in general, and so Alolan Marowak already puts on the mind games in Team Preview, and it makes it really difficult. Ground type attacks and poison type attacks and Pokemon are really good. With ground type Pokemon, you have to be careful a little bit, because a lot of the ground type Pokemon in this format do have another typing. So Garchomp and Krookodile do get hit by, for example, Dazzling Gleam for super effective damage, but because Dazzling Gleam is still kind of weak from Tapu Koko's Meteor special attack, a lot of the times you can survive that attack and maybe KO in return with an Earthquake or a Ground Z move. Mudsdale is a pretty cool option as well. It can definitely take Tapu Koko's attacks pretty well, and in fact, if you switch into a Dazzling Gleam, you could even get a stamina boost. And so, you know, obviously Earthquake as well from Pokemon that aren't ground types. You know, I've been using Choice Band Metagross with Earthquake, and that's a really nice way to just kind of nuke it instantly. Poison type attacks and poison type Pokemon. Obviously, Poison Jab is one of the most common attacks out there. Alolan Muck's actually really annoying to deal with as a Tapu Koko user, because you can hit them for some okay damage, but they'll have the Figi Berry most likely, since that's the most common item, so they can heal back at everything, and Poison Jab can just knock you out, especially if they get the poison. Even if you're Sash, you know, they'll just be able to pick up the knockout. So it's one of those Pokemon that's like pretty bulky, doesn't mind taking an attack or two from Koko and can KO in return. In general, strong neutral attacks and Z moves are really good. If you realize that the Tapu Koko on your opponent's team isn't Focus Sash, then Z moves such as Golduck Z move, if you have Rain Up, or Tapu Lele Z move, or really any Z move can just one-shot Tapu Koko, and so it's a big deal if it doesn't have a Focus Sash. In general, strong neutral attacks most of the time just to hit KO Koko anyway, since it's pretty frail, so you can just take advantage of that and double target it and just go for the KO instantly. Obviously, I should mention that winning the Terrain War is a big deal as well. One of Tapu Koko's main selling points is that it's fast and it has electric terrain. So, as a result, because Tapu Koko is the fastest Tapu out there, all the other Tapus most likely will be able to win the Terrain War. So, if you expect Tapu Koko as a lead from your opponent, you can lead with one of your Tapus and instantly win the Terrain War. And that's a big deal, because if electric terrain isn't around, then the electric type attacks from Tapu Koko are significantly weaker. If you can decrease that damage output from the start, then your opponent's already one step behind. Obviously, Feeny still gets hit for super effective damage, but Feeny is a pretty bulky Pokemon. We've seen some Choice Specs variants running around as well. Bulu and Lele, of course, both pretty strong options and can bring Koko down either to its Focus Sash or just one-shot it. And so winning the Terrain War is a big deal, because if you can reduce that damage output, then all of a sudden Koko is a lot weaker. Another option is just bulky Pokemon that can take its attacks, and that's kind of generic, but what I mean is, like, Alolan Muck actually fits into this category, and this is a category where it's like, okay, I can take a Thunderbolt or two from you, and I can just KO you in return. Porygon 2, for example, can just heal back all the damage that it takes from Tapu Koko using Recover, and then it can just try attack or, you know, go for any of its offensive attacks and maybe 2 or 3 shot it, depending on whether it gets the download boost. But that's a big deal, because if you waste Tapu Koko's attacks, then you can just heal back wreck everything, and it basically effectively wastes Tapu Koko's time on the field. Tapu Koko is one of those Pokemon that really wants to get heavy damage and, wants to get knockouts. And if you have Pokemon that can heal back either with berries or items or with a recover, for example, then it makes Tapu Koko's job a lot harder. I also think that figuring out Tapu Koko's item is one of the most important things, and for me, normally the question is, does it have a Life Orb or does it have a Focus Sash? If it has a Focus Sash, then I have to be careful, because it means that I can't just one-shot it with one of my super effective attacks, but it also means that it doesn't have as much damage output as a Life Orb or Specs variant would have. And if it's Life Orb or Specs, then you know that it can't have Focus Sash and you can one-shot it. So in a best of 3 especially, you really want to take advantage of knowing what item it has, because that goes a long way, and it means that it either is doing less damage but surviving for a little bit longer, or doing significantly more damage, but you can just check it a little bit easier and try to knock it out before it can do too much. And so I like to really figure out Koko's item because it makes playing around it a lot easier. And finally, setting up Trick Room is a great option because Tapu Koko is one of the fastest Pokemon in the metagame, so if you set up Trick Room, obviously, then it will be going last under Trick Room most of the times, and given that it's pretty thorough as well, you can just, double target it or target it and pick up a knockout instantly. And so, Trick Room, strong option, and Trick Room teams generally give Koko some trouble. That's why Taunt is a pretty nice option on Tapu Koko now. So, I also want to talk a little bit about potential partners, and while I'm at this tangent, I want to include 2 links that I think will be helpful. If you're interested in seeing top performing teams that had Tapu Koko on the team composition, I'll link to the top teams from London International and San Jose Regionals, and those links will have basically all the teams that went very far at those events, and it will include, you can see basically, oh, Tapu Koko worked really well with these Pokemon, oh, it fit onto this team composition, and this potential partner list is just a couple of examples, but I think those links will help you guys a lot as well, because they'll basically show you all the top performing teams with Tapu Koko, and you'll see that it's actually really diverse. Like, Tapu Koko is on all kinds of different teams, and so those links are in the description below. They're on a website called Trainer Tower. It's recently started out, but has some really, really solid VGC 17 content already, so I highly recommend you guys check them out. But a couple of partners that we've seen with Tapu Koko already. Alolan Raichu is very intuitive because of Alolan Raichu's ability. Speed doubles when electric terrain is up, so you get a quick 1-2 punch with it, and if you do have electric terrain up, man, it's a really, really deadly combination. Garchomp and Gastrodon are both kind of intuitive as well for different reasons. Well, the main one is that Discharge works nicely with both of them, but with Garchomp, you're really, really fast, and so kind of similar to Raichu, you have this quick 1-2 punch. But with Gastrodon, Gastrodon is one of those very bulky and very support-oriented Pokemon, so it synergizes well with Koko because Koko, you don't want a team generally that's all completely hyper offense, although that's kind of funny, I guess, because the main team I've been using is super hyper offense. But with Koko and Gastrodon, what you can do is Koko kind of threatens with fast attacks, and Gastrodon kind of stalls out games and draws them out, so it's difficult to focus on both of them at once. And that actually kind of goes into the next 2 Pokemon as well, in Celesteal and Porygon 2. Porygon 2, you're probably like, wow, that's kind of weird. Why would I use Porygon 2 with a really fast Pokemon? And Trick Room counters Tapu Koko. But the idea is that Tapu Koko is, a lot of the times it's either in the front, you lead with it, and then you kind of get an attack off or 2 with it before it gets knocked down, and then Trick Room goes up, or you keep it in the back and you set up Trick Room and then you clean up the game with Tapu Koko. It's kind of like how we saw a lot of Landuruses back on VGC 2013 teams, or even 15 teams that had Trick Room, and even though it's relatively speedy, you can kind of set up for the late game. It's not the best comparison there, I guess, because Landorus was definitely significantly slower than Tapu Koko, but the idea there is that you have this really fast offensive threat and you can clean up games with it or immediately start games off with it. And Celesteela and Porygon 2, both are Pokemon that you have to direct heavy attention to. These are Pokemon that often take multiple attacks to knock out and stick around for the field for a long time. And it's difficult to concentrate your attention on both Koko and Celesteela or Porygon 2 at the same time, so you can really take advantage of that. And finally, 2 Intimidate options that I really like are Gyarados and Arcanine. Krookodile is also a pretty intuitive one because it's ground type and you can discharge safely with it, but Gyarados is nice because it covers a lot of the ground type weaknesses or ground type Pokemon that Tapu Koko is weak to. And Arcanine's super nice because, Koko is a relatively frail Pokemon. And when you have Arcanine, you have Intimidate support, you have Will-O-Wisp and Snarl support, so you basically increase Koko's time around on the field for a bit longer with all the support. And so that's why, Sekiam, who once again I've mentioned so many times in this video, but he had a really nice team, and it did feature Tapu Koko, had a lot of these partners such as Celesteela, Gastrodon, Garchomp, and Arcanine, so it's no surprise to see me mentioning a lot of these Pokemon. But if you're interested in other team compositions that had Tapu Koko, like I mentioned, check out the links in the description below. So, overall, I wanted to do this guide, even if you've played against a lot of Tapu Kokos, even though people have done guides on this already, because Tapu Koko right now is one of the most common Pokemon in the format. It was the 4th most used Pokemon in Day 2 of the London International, and it was actually tied for the most used Pokemon in San Jose's Top Cut. In San Jose's Top Cut, I believe, 16 players Top Cut and 10 had Tapu Koko. Now, the nice thing about Tapu Koko and the nice thing about VGC 2017 as a whole is that even the strongest Pokemon are super manageable. Doesn't feel like old VGC formats such as formats with Kangaskhan or obviously Kyogre, Groudon, Xerneas, where these Pokemon are just super centralizing. Koko is just really commonly used right now because it fits very nicely onto a lot of teams and it's got great offensive synergy. But like I mentioned, there are a ton of ways you can beat it as well, and it's definitely very manageable. So you don't have to worry about it, or I should say, it's not like super broken or super OP, but I did want to do this guide because you might be curious on how to use Tapu Koko, or you might be curious on basically its role in the format or how to beat it. And so, in general, you're going to face a lot of Tapu Kokos, especially right now in the metagame and the state of the metagame if you play VGC 2017. So, you definitely should adequately prepare for it, and like I mentioned, there are a list of ways that I mentioned on how to beat it, but also feel free to try out a couple of sets or modify them as I included in this video. So, that will conclude my guide to Tapu Koko. Like I mentioned, it's supposed to be a relatively basic guide that covers all the important points of the Pokemon, and I'm sure there's a lot of, big things that I might have missed here and there, but in general, I hope you guys found this guide helpful. If you did, please show your support by leaving a like on the video and sharing it with anyone else who might be interested in Tapu Koko or VGC 2017 as a whole. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I will see you guys soon, and thank you for watching. Peace.